Thank you, Amy, for the nice welcome. I'm very, very happy to be here back in Montgomery, especially here at the archives, where I've done so much research, as Amy said, for nearly 20 years. And before I begin, I'd just like to say some brief thank yous, and I mean brief, about my indebtedness to Attorney J. Mason Davis and the Honorable Helen Shores, who were so generous with their time and their memories when I was up in Birmingham. Attorney Davis is a longtime Prince Hall Mason, and he was associated with the temple. And Judge Lee's father was the renowned attorney Arthur Shores, also a Mason. I'll forever be grateful to Dr. L. Ken Collins, who's the Grand Historian of Alabama's Prince Hall Grand Lodge. Is Ken here today? And the reason I ask if he's here is that I've spent hours and hours on the phone with him, but I've never seen him face to face. He works out of Washington. And he explained and explained and explained until I got it, and also read the article and made some helpful suggestions before it was published. And finally, thank all of you for coming and for your enthusiasm for this wonderful slice of Alabama history. Are there any Prince Hall Masons here this afternoon? No? Okay, fine. It's just, I thought if there were a few, it would help if we need some explanation. Well, anyway, here we begin, and there it is, and there it is. The most wonderful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. This lovely, and it is lovely, Renaissance Revival building stands at the corner of 17th Street and 4th Avenue North up in Birmingham. All the doors are locked now. Many of the windows are boarded up and broken, and all of its tenants are gone. Once, however, it was Black Birmingham's social and political center and its cultural heart. The 92-year-old building is now an endangered landmark, and it is not simply historic, no, not at all. It's a warehouse packed with individual stories and memories of very rich life experiences. Its dozens of empty rooms bear witness to the largely forgotten story of the Prince Hall Masons' role in the struggle for racial justice in Alabama. The temple's legacy, much like the legacy of the civil rights movement itself, is not one big story. It's rather a million little ones, and many of them spun out in that building there. Prince Hall Masonry was once referred to as Black Masonry or Colored Masonry, and it was actually established 1 year before the American Revolution. Its founder was a free black man, Prince Hall of Boston, and he and 14 of his friends approached the city's St. John's Lodge for membership. They were denied, but they were not defeated. They turned around and applied to Military Lodge number 441 actually, run by a company of Irish infantrymen who were temporarily stationed in the city. The Irish Lodge initiated all of them into Masonry on March 6, 1775, and they became African Lodge number 1. Prince Hall was their first master. When the Irishmen were called home, Boston's Grand Lodge refused to recognize the African Lodge, but despite this, the 15 men continued to meet. Many of them subsequently enlisted in the Continental Army when the Revolutionary War broke out. But ironically, when the war ended, these black veterans had to petition the Grand Lodge of England, England, Great Britain, we just came out of a war with it, to get an official charter. Boston's White Lodge was determined to keep them out. They got their English charter in 1784 and became First African Lodge, Prince Hall number 1, named for their founder. Prince Hall himself was very active in the Boston abolitionist community. He petitioned the Massachusetts Assembly for full citizenship and voting rights for blacks. He encouraged his lodge brothers to buy property, to build their own businesses, and to care for the poor and the sick. These were all very traditional Masonic values. In 1797, the African lodges were established in Philadelphia and in Providence, Rhode Island, all under the British Charter. Prince Hall died in 1807, and a year later, Boston, Philadelphia, and the Providence lodges created an African National Grand Lodge later that year in Boston. And it was established in Boston because by this time, Boston was considered the mother city. By 1857, colored masonry had finally entered the Deep South. Simon Ash, a free black cotton merchant, and I hope you do pick up a copy of the magazine. There are pictures of all of these people and wonderful shots of inside the temple. But anyway, in 1857, Simon Ash, who was a free black cotton merchant, established a lodge in New Orleans. In 1863, the Reverend Henry McNeil Turner, who was the first bishop of the AME Church, and who later would become chaplain of the U.S. colored troops, as they were called at the time, during the Civil War. So these two prosperous individuals founded Pythagoras Lodge in Savannah, Georgia. Successful men like Simon Ash and Reverend Turner began to foster a network within the Prince Hall lodges where better educated brothers assisted the new initiates, who were often farmers and mechanics and laborers, and helped them to develop confidence and perhaps even more important, leadership skills. In 1859, Simon Ash moved to Xenia, Ohio, where he joined Wilberforce Lodge number 21 and became involved in Underground Railroad activities. Ash and his lodge brothers provided runaway slaves with money, food, clothing, and the shelter and the protection of their lodges, their homes, their churches, and their places of business. After the Civil War, Ash moved to Mobile, where in 1868, he and four of his business associates established the Olive Branch Lodge. And this Olive Branch Lodge was the first colored lodge in Alabama. So this is where Alabama Masonry, Prince Hall Masonry, descends from. By 1876, 9 Prince Hall lodges were operating in the state, 3 in Mobile, 1 in Montgomery, and 5 in the rural districts. Rural Alabama became the fastest growing source of new Masons. Then, in 1874, black Masons established a lodge in the booming new industrial city of Birmingham. All Prince Hall Masons were expected to support and protect each other. Their dues assisted families in times of illness or disability and provided survivor benefits for widows and dependent children. Many men joined the lodges just to ensure dignified burials, and preachers often served as lodge masters. In 1878, there were enough black Masons in Alabama to organize a statewide Grand Lodge, and it was established up in Birmingham. And if you remember, Northern industrialists had built Birmingham during the Reconstruction period as a strictly segregated city. They wanted to keep tight control on their workforce to guarantee that unions, should they attempt to organize, would never be integrated. Black and white workers were to be kept separate and distrustful of each other. And ironically, as it happened, this directly contributed to the growth of an independent black business district and creation of Birmingham's strong black middle class, from which the Black Elks, the True Reformers, the Pythians, and the Oddfellows also recruited for membership. By 1902, there were 104 Prince Hall Masonic lodges in Alabama. They represented a membership of almost 3,000. By 1910, there were 11,000 members associated with 414 lodges. A percentage of their dues went to the new Grand Lodge to create benefit funds, and many of these benefit funds eventually spun off and became Black-owned and operated insurance companies. Lodge dues also funded a substantial endowment. Then in 1913, under the stewardship of Grand Master W.T. Woods, Birmingham's Grand Lodge decided it was going to build a grand temple. Robert Taylor and Leo Persley, who were Alabama's two professional black architects, did all the design work. In 1922, the black-owned and operated Wyndham Brothers construction company broke ground. The temple was built at a total cost of $650,000 and financed without a mortgage. During that 10-year period of planning, several capital campaigns had been launched, and a loan from the endowment fund covered the cost in full, so they were able to move forward without debt. Well, Birmingham's most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge opened its doors in 1924 to showcase a 1,500-seat auditorium, a grand ballroom, and lodge rooms on the second, third, and fourth floors. Professional office space was available for long-term leasing by health, legal, social, and educational organizations, as well as retail and restaurant businesses. Church and civic groups could rent space as needed, and the grand ballroom was available for social events including weddings, family reunions, and graduations. The auditorium provided a venue for concerts, variety shows, athletic events, and celebrities like Duke Ellington and Count Basie, who were also Prince Hall Masons, regularly played the temple. The Booker T. Washington Library filled 3 rooms on the first floor. Other tenants included 5 attorneys, 2 accountants, 6 medical and 5 dental offices, 7 insurance companies, a barbershop, a jeweler, a billiards parlor, and the radio cab company. NAACP offices were on the 7th floor, and their Southeast Regional District office was later housed on the 6th. They were the only rent-free tenants, and all their attorneys were Prince Hall Masons. The Jefferson County Negro School Board and the Boy Scouts also maintained headquarters in the building. Then comes the Depression. Between 1932 and 1956, the temple became a kind of civil rights strategy center. This did not sit very well with white Masons who were allegedly non-political. However, the need to confront segregation and discrimination and to take action when voting rights and fair housing statutes were ignored and to challenge police brutality often compelled the black fraternity to operate outside its professional comfort zone. Prince Hall Masonic leaders were often caught between a desire to negotiate with the white establishment and to the need to protest its actions. So although white Freemasons did not permit political discussion in their lodges, black Masons did not always have that luxury. On the other hand, the temple's tenants represented the full gamut of black political thought, from very conservative to militantly activist. While there was a great general consensus that police brutality, the poll tax, discrimination, and segregation all had to go, there was great disagreement about just how that was to be accomplished. W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, who was a champion of black self-sufficiency, was both a Prince Hall Mason and an NAACP official. He frequently argued with his boss, Walter White, whose goal was full racial integration. But the frustration of dealing with segregation and racism on a daily basis actually became the glue that held so many of these so very different factions together and kept them under one roof. An all-Southern Scottsboro and Civil Rights Conference opened at the temple on October 2nd, 1932. international labor defense attorneys, in partnership with the American Communist Party and the League for the Struggle for Negro Rights, rented the auditorium to raise funds for the first Scottsboro Boys' appeal to the Alabama Supreme Court. And if you remember your history, you remember that the Scottsboro Boys were 9 black teens arrested in North Alabama in March of 1931. They were charged with raping 2 white women on a freight train traveling from Chattanooga to Memphis. Their communist attorneys filed an appeal which got them temporary stays of execution. But appeals cost money, and so this fundraiser was being held at the temple. The fundraiser itself was the culmination of a week of outdoor rallies where Viola Montgomery, who was the mother of Scottsboro boy Olin Montgomery, addressed large crowds in Kelly Ingram Park. Despite intimidation by a 20-car Klan parade that tore through the black districts at night, and despite the arrest of Otto Hall, the black conference organizer, 350 blacks and 50 whites entered the temple for their conference. 80 police officers surrounded the building, and whites threatened everyone who entered, but the fundraiser went forward, and it was successful. Hosea Hudson, a black Birmingham steelworker who had been recently fired for union organizing, was in that crowd that day. He was a member of the Communist Party, and he also served as vice president of the Jefferson County Workers Alliance. In 1937, Hudson would organize a Right to Vote club to teach black voters the registration process and how to deal with it. Hudson sponsored voting clinics in rooms he leased at the temple, and he collaborated with the Jefferson County Negro Democratic League, led by NAACP attorney Arthur Shores and the educator W.C. Patton, who were both Prince Hall Masons. Although the Democratic League's members were generally middle class, and the Right to Vote Club members were generally working class, they managed to cooperate. In 1938, when Hudson filed discrimination charges on behalf of Right to Vote Club members who had been denied registration, Arthur Shores represented many of them. Emory Jackson, editor of the Birmingham World and executive secretary of the Birmingham NAACP, and a member of the Right to Vote Club, also assisted. Jackson was not a Mason. He was a member of the Pythians, a rival fraternity with a very beautiful temple of their own a few blocks away from this one. Because of their efforts, the Jefferson County black voters nearly quadrupled between 1938 and 1940. And this cross-pollination of organizations, as I said, from the whole political spectrum, living under one roof, continued throughout the Depression years and through the Second World War. In 1937, the Southern Negro Youth Congress, which was a black-led coalition of students, teachers, domestics, sharecroppers, and miners, all of them dedicated to getting black voters registered, leased rooms 526, 527, and 528 at the temple. The Youth Congress collaborated with the Communist Party's mass demonstrations, and they worked with the CIO's labor organization drives in Birmingham. All of them, everyone, participated in the NAACP's campaigns to make lynching a federal crime. When the Right to Vote Club disbanded in 1940, the Youth Congress organized and abolished the poll tax week. Their partners included the Birmingham World, the CIO, the Southern Conference for Human Welfare, the Black Elks, the Prince Hall Masons, and the White League of Young Southerners. White young Southerners and black Youth Congress members often met in the coffee shop located on the first floor of the temple to organize joint campaigns to abolish the poll tax, protest police brutality, and expose civil liberties violations against union organizers. This raised the ire of the city police, as it was, of course, in violation of the segregation ordinance. But they continued to meet, and they continued to jointly demonstrate, and they laid the foundation for what would become Birmingham's movement culture. And then after the Second World War, the Southern Negro Youth Congress assisted black veterans file for their GI benefits. Emory Jackson led the Veterans March for voter registration, and 100 black men in uniform walked from the temple to the Jefferson County Courthouse carrying signs that said, "Come on along with us. Join us to register. Bring your discharge papers." 1951, the NAACP established a Southern District office in the Birmingham Temple, and Ruby Hurley was appointed field director. She moved into room 624. In 1956, 5 years later, Hurley fled that office to avoid a restraining order barring the NAACP from operating in Alabama. Why? What had happened in the interim? Well, the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education decision, the one that declared segregated public schools unconstitutional, had demonstrated the effectiveness of the NAACP. It also moved Alabama Attorney General John Patterson to issue a restraining order to stop the NAACP from doing business in the state. He also subpoenaed the membership records of the NAACP, as well as this restraining order to stop them dead in their tracks. Well, Ruby Hurley decided that she was not, under any circumstances, going to release the membership information. She knew full well that it would result in job loss, home eviction, destruction of small business, ruined careers, and even personal injury for those people whose names were found on the list. So, on May 26, 1956, state officials padlocked the NAACP offices in the temple. But Ruby Hurley had already spirited those records right out the front door, and they were safely locked in Emory Jackson's safe in the Birmingham World office, which was right across the street. Go out the front door and cross the street, and there was the Birmingham World offices. They remained safely there for the next 8 years. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund fought this restraining order and that subpoena all the way to the Supreme Court. The court ultimately ruled that the demand for the records was in fact a violation of the 14th Amendment, but they did not lift the restraining order. This partial victory for the Attorney General backfired, and backfired very badly. In fact, it blew up right in his face in the person of Fred Shuttlesworth. The Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth was the pastor of the Bethel Baptist Church, and he chaired the NAACP's Voter Education and Registration Committee. He vowed that he was going to continue that committee's work. And so he led sit-ins, fought for access to city jobs, organized bus boycotts, department store boycotts, and generally agitated for reform more energetically than the NAACP ever had. So Shuttlesworth became Patterson's worst nightmare. His Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights ultimately joined forces with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Then, in 1961, in May, the Prince Hall Temple sheltered the Freedom Riders who had been beaten outside Anniston and those who were clubbed in Birmingham's Greyhound bus station. In the summer of 1963, the temple served as a first aid station for young demonstrators who had been beaten, dispersed with fire hoses, and set upon by dogs for their march from the 16th Street Baptist Church to the downtown shopping district. 60s came and the 60s went, and by the late 60s and early 70s, Birmingham began to experience all the tribulations that economic downturn, white flight, and integration's unintended consequences brought to so many other black downtowns. The historic Grand Lodge became too costly to maintain. In 2011, the last tenants were moved out and the building was shut down. 5 years have since passed, and currently there is some interest in saving and even developing the temple. There's been an increase in lodge membership, and plans for capital campaigns reaching out to both the public and the private sectors are underway. So there is hope, and hope is always good news. This magnificent Grand Lodge, the social, political, and cultural heart of Black Birmingham, was a place of weddings and graduations, of theater, jazz, study, and protest. It provided safe space and shelter for activists, politicians, students, leaders, and followers of every stripe. It gave them a place to debate, to collaborate, and to support each other in the effort to work toward a better tomorrow, even if they couldn't always agree on a strategy for getting there. So why should this building and monuments like it be preserved? Because, as one preservationist has recently said, the past is not the property of historians. It is a public possession. It belongs to anyone who's aware of it, and it grows by being shared. It sustains the whole society, which always needs the identity that only the past can give us. So let's hope that the great temple's doors will open again, wide and welcoming, and let's hope that that can happen very, very soon. Thank you.
All right, we have plenty of time for question and answers. If you would just please raise your hand, and either myself or Georgia Ann will pass you the microphone. We're recording today's session.
Really enjoyed your talk. I grew up on the farm in Huntsville.
Hello.
And my father was a Mason. And one of the things I was always proud of was that once a year during the summer months, he'd go off to the Grand Lodge meeting. I had no idea it was tied to this structure in Birmingham. My question, though, is as you look at the evolution of, I guess, the Black Masons in Alabama, and then as you roll forward, like even to this era, you have any kind of insight as to what has happened to the Masons organization, I guess more or less statewide or nationwide in the U.S. since then?
Statewide and nationwide, I think as a whole, the organization is not attracting a whole lot of new members because of the different lifestyle that we have in the late 20th, early 21st century. You know, the Masons reflected the ties of community, and somehow some of those ties have been broken. I mean, it's easy enough to see. People are often more concerned with their careers, with, you know, we've become a very restless country in many ways. But where you find community still strong, you often find new Masons and a revival of the independent, you know, the local lodges. I think that many of the Grand Lodges all over the country are being condoed, are being made into all different uses, and the buildings are absolutely beautiful. You know, I've seen a couple of them. Or take, for example, the one up in Birmingham, the Pythian Temple. Last time I was up there, that was being renovated for multi-use. And, you know, if you can find federal grants to help as I understand the Pythians did, you can keep the architectural memories of these Masons, but that's not answering your question. Talking about the growth, I think where community is strong, you'll find revival, but where it isn't, it's probably dead and gone, I think.
Question over here.
I have a comment and a question. I apologize because I did arrive a little bit late, but I wondered if I read the article with great interest, and I noted that the architects of the building were Robert Taylor and what was referred to in the article as Leo Pursley. And actually it's Louis Pursley, and I wonder if that correction had been made by the authors at any location. And that was my comment. My question is whether or not there is any kind of historic record of the original Alabama Masons in this archive or anywhere else in Alabama.
I don't know about this archive. I didn't do a lot of my research here. As the fellow that I mentioned earlier, Ken Collins, who is the grand historian of the Birmingham Temple, he splits his time between Birmingham and his day job, which he does in Washington, and he was the one that, I mean, he is an incredible source of information, and he went through all these time periods with me, gave me the names, and I further, but I'm not sure what's here. Maybe one of the archivists. Oh yes, of course, Debbie, you can help us with it.
We have some very early spotty Masonic records, but generally the Masons themselves have their own archives. The statewide organization has its own archives and museums, and they're very protective of those records.
Yes,
so you have to go to them, and you can get access to those records usually through their organization. And I'm not sure, I think it was here in Montgomery, but I'm not sure if it still is. I'm thinking it might be in Millbrook now. For the White Masons, I'm not sure about the Prince Hall Masons.
Very interesting. J. Mason Davis and I go back a long way, but I thought it was ironic as I sit here and listen to you. Yesterday I sat in a committee hearing of the legislature, and we had black and white Masons there on the issue. And I thought, I got sitting here listening, I said, how ironic. So they still work together on some things.
Well, that's good news. That is good news.
If you were asking a question about the oldest lodge in Alabama is in Huntsville. That's the oldest one. That's number one. But I have a question. Now, how many separate lodges were in the building at the time?
That's a very good question. I don't know, but I do know that there were a number of different lodges in Birmingham, because one was almost 100% made up by miners. Others were businessmen within, and there were some that crossed over a class and money and all those kinds of things, but not as many that kind of sorted themselves out as.
I was wondering, the article I saw on the internet said it was about 30,000 Masons were associated with that building.
With the building itself, I'm not surprised. Well, they may have been counting, good, they may have been counting the lodges throughout Alabama that sent their dues.
Well, I know, like, where I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they've got a huge Masonic temple there, and it was about 25,000 Masons in the city and the surrounding county, which, given the fact that was in the 20s, meant that a substantial proportion of the male population in that whole area were Masons.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, it served so many purposes, to make business contacts. As I said, some people just join so that have a decent, dignified burial. Others join to learn skills that they may have never been able to learn: bookkeeping, organization, how to run a meeting, all those kinds of things. And in places where, during Prohibition, where you couldn't drink, there wasn't the bar on the corner to go to or whatever. You certainly didn't want to stay home. You could get together and have some really good fellowship with guys who not only had the the pageantry, which was very inviting in those days, and the dignity and the good times. I mean, they had wonderful times. They ran dances. They did a lot of things. So it served a real social purpose.
So have you been inside the building?
This building?
Yeah.
I was real lucky. I got in before the curtain came down. When I was up in Birmingham doing research on a paper I was doing about Emory Jackson, my sister is right here in the front row. We were walking down the street, and the building was open, but it looked like it was, on its way. And he was either the security guard or the custodian. I don't know who he was. We passed. We were looking in the window. He said, "Would you like a tour of the building?" And yes, I would like a tour of the building. And he took us through the auditorium. Oh, the grand ballroom was really something else. And then up on the floors where the doctors and dentist dentist offices was. Do you remember that frosty glass that looked like, every one of those doors had that kind of glass with the in gold and the name of the dentist, the name of the building, a business rather. And the Eastern Star had a big presence in the building. A couple of the ladies were still there as we walked through. It was really something. And your imagination was stirred about what it must have been in its heyday when it served so many purposes. And, the thought that it's just may pass into time. If it has to happen, it has to happen. But it's really quite a sad story.
I had actually one more question
Sure.
for you. When you toured there in the meeting rooms, did you happen to notice if any of the rooms had an Egyptian motif?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I assume that once the building was closed down, they took out all of the stuff that was used for the actual lodge in session. I don't expect that's still in there now, because that's really, if you close a church, you take, the stuff that you use with you. So I don't think that's still there, but yes, I did see that.
Okay, I have a comment and a question concerning what David asked about. Black Masonry is still alive and well in Alabama. If you go to the Bloody Sunday celebration in Selma, you'll know that hundreds of Black Masons cross the bridge each year. Now, my question, and I'll make a couple of statements before the question. Once when I was a dues-paying Mason, I was in Washington County and I had my ring on, and a white Mason said, "Well, I note that you have your ring on, however, we can't talk," which meant that we could not discuss Masonry business. And the question that I have is, we note that during the Reconstruction era and Jim Crow era, there were a lot of lynchings. In your research, have you found where being a Mason for a Black person saved them from being lynched?
That's a wonderful question. I have found that there were legends that some of this did happen, but I have not been able to substantiate any incident of that. Conceivably, it could have happened. A handshake, you get into somebody,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. A handshake may have done it. On the other hand, I believe that the man who killed Medgar Evers was a Mason, a white Mason, and he killed Medgar Evers, who was a Black Mason. I don't know if I think it was an ambush, and I don't know if they ever met face to face or had that opportunity. But I have not been able to find one that I could say was an actual event. One other thing, during the age of time of discrimination, segregation, Masonic temples also, if you were traveling through a segregated state, you could stop at a Masonic lodge and expect to find a welcome, whether or not you were a Mason, if you were a black family going through. And so if you couldn't find a hotel, or if you were afraid to stop, many tourists and travelers stopped at these lodges, and they were given welcome and a safe place to stay. So it served that purpose as well for many years, the whole organization.
One last question. I guess the other part of it I wanted to ask earlier.
Oh, yes.
One of the things I was told, I guess, a good bit after I left home, not by my father, who was once a wishful master for years, but some people allege that the doctrine of Masons is contradictory to Christianity. You have any kind of comment on that?
Well, I can give an opinion. It's not the best educated opinion, but I don't see anything in Masonry that is contradictory to Christianity. I've heard the argument many, many times. I suppose if you pick hard enough at anything, you could find something, but no, it was different. It was based on, from what I've read, the Enlightenment and ideas of rationality and how the universe was organized around geometry, and they spoke about democracy and freedom and how to live a good life and how good men could become better men, and that was in the lodges. And then when the lodge was closed, they were able to have, as I said, wonderful times and fellowship together. So I think it was different, but I don't see bones of contention.
Oh, I'd comment on your question. Now, my understanding is the Roman Catholic Church at the time was very, very opposed to Masonry, and it had to do with free thinking and, in fact, with the Enlightenment.
Exactly.
The popes did not like Masonry at all, and in fact, Masonic membership was excommunicatable. And with the Lutheran Church, the opposition to Masonry, and again, if you were a Masonic member in most Lutheran churches, in the past you'd have been excommunicated, and that had to do with the fact that Masons believe in good deeds, and in Lutheranism that's considered works righteousness, and it goes against justification by faith, and so therefore they would not have wanted to put an emphasis on that. Some people have calmed down on that issue, but the thing is, on an outside looking at it, you say, well, what's wrong with good deeds? But the thing is, if the idea of you connected good deeds, you become saved. That was the works righteousness, and that was the objection.
Oh, okay.
David, all I can say about that is Masonry is based on the Bible in a lot of its ceremony and traditions. That's about all I can tell you about that, that the Bible is the basis for Masonry. Now, whether it's Christianity or whatever, but certain things you cannot say.
I'd just like to invite everybody to listen to a fantastic YouTube video that I listened to coming down here that talks about how Masonry started 4,600 years before Christianity, the Roman Empire, what is the other one? He talked about Jehovah's Witnesses, Islamic faith, and the Christian faith. And he talks about the date that Solomon and different types of people were born. I don't want to insult. It's very academic. It may be a little kind of heavy. It's about an hour and a half long. But if you Google what did I Google? I believe I Googled Masonry plus Alabama, no, Prince Hall plus Alabama, and it will be the second video to come up, but it's super, super informative, and I think based on the comments that I just heard, we'd all find a lot of enlightenment, and I encourage everybody to share it because it's great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and thank our speaker once more.
Thank you. Thank you very much.